everybody, and you're very welcome back to the Empowered Self podcast. I'm your host, Krystal, and wherever this finds you today, I invite you to take a small pause and gently arrive into this moment. Today's conversation is one I feel is going to resonate deeply with so many people, especially if you've ever felt overwhelmed, struggled to stay organized, find it hard to follow through on tasks, or maybe felt misunderstood in how your mind works. Today, we're exploring executive functioning, neurodiversity, and what it really means to support ourselves and others in a world that isn't always designed with different ways of thinking in mind. It's also a topic I feel really connected to my own work supporting students within education and training settings. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I'm so delighted to welcome today's guest, who is Kate MacDonald. And Kate is an executive functioning coach who works with neurodiverse adolescents and adults, supporting them with skills like planning, organization, time management, focus, motivation, and follow through. Kate brings over 15 years of experience in education, including roles as an exceptional education teacher, higher education disability services professional, a college professor, and coach. Kate also supports students and families navigating systems like IEPs and 504 plans. We'll get to those later, as well as transitioning from school into higher education and beyond. Kate, you're very welcome to the podcast. It's lovely to have you here. How are you doing?
I am great, Krystal. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to spending this time together.
Lovely. And before we get in deeper, I would love to start with your own journey. Kate, you've such a rich background across education and disability services. What was the moment or turning point that led you into this work as an executive functioning coach?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What an interesting journey it has been. And I think for a lot of coaches, hopefully this will feel familiar to some folks, whether they're a coach or just on their career journey. But in college, I didn't even study education. I was a history and archaeology student. I believed I was going to go and do archaeology in my master's program. And at the very last minute, I was like, I don't think this is for me, right? But I need something. I need to do something, right? And my mom was an exceptional ed teacher for decades, just about to retire. And so, and I loved watching her work, had the opportunity to do that when I was a lot younger still, right? Still in sort of my middle school, high school years. And I was like, I want to see what that would be like, right? To do what she did and have the impact she had on families and students. And so I decided to go teach middle school at a low-income Title I school near where I grew up after college. And I taught exceptional ed English in middle school for 2 years. And I was in love, right? I adored my students. I thought like they were just so creative and talented, had so many strengths, had so much to bring. But I really decided after 2 years that I wanted to work with older students. And so I transitioned to higher ed. And in higher ed, it's a wild west. And at that time, coaching was sort of still relatively new. And most higher ed disability services professionals were accustomed to coaching in one way, shape, or form because students needed it, right? Whether or not, the resources were there in the higher ed environment to provide it. So I started coaching there and working one-on-one with students to think about how to get from point A to point B, how to move from, I want this grade, but I just don't know how to earn it. Everything feels so disorganized. I'm so overwhelmed. I feel unmotivated in this specific class. I don't know what to study. All of those things just felt like that partnership between me and them it was an incredible feeling. It was incredible to watch them just be able to grow and become who they were wanting to become. And ultimately, folks started asking if I would coach their student, right? Or their college student, their high school student, because this was after 2020 when I think coaching even exploded even more than it had before. And so I started in private practice and coaching young adults and adolescents. And it has been just such a gift to be able to walk alongside so many sort of folks that are going through transitional times, their first job, their first college experience, their transition from high school into adulthood. Just such a gift to have them, even give me a small glimpse of their life and how I can support them to get what they're looking for.
Okay, so to come from archaeology into coaching and into higher ed, that's some journey.
Incredible. Incredible.
And it is
nothing alike.
No chalk and cheese. There's chalk and cheese.
There's air conditioning in coaching. There's air conditioning in coaching. There's no air conditioning in archaeology. So big difference with the temperature for sure.
And one of the things you're working on at the moment is executive function, which is something we hear more and more about. But it can still feel quite abstract for people. How would you describe it in everyday life, and what does it actually look like?
Yeah, I think when we think about the terms, people are like, what is initiation, right? Like when you say like, what is emotional liability? Like, what does that mean, right? And I think a lot of it is really less complicated than it appears, right? Which I think is what your question is sort of indicating, Krystal, as well. But anytime we're thinking about like our ability to organize something, right? So a lot of folks think about like with children, like backpacks, right? That are just like exploding with paper or, bags of sports gear that are just exploding with dirty, clothes and different, whatever it is you're using or whatever sport you're doing. Or, for adults that can look like, a kitchen that has a lot of dirty dishes in it, right? Like whatever that might look like, right? Things are sort of not what we would deem sort of tidy, right? Or a lot of folks that sort of this goal-oriented persistence, like thinking about how do I set a goal and then work towards that, right? So folks that are struggling with that, folks that are struggling to manage time, right? Like time blindness. I'm not sure how long something is going to take, or I don't know how to manage a day's worth of time to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish, both in the short term, but also like, this is something I want to accomplish today, but also maybe this is something I want to accomplish in 3 weeks' time, right? Like, how do I work back from this is the day I want to have this thing done to today? What am I going to have to do today to make that happen, right? Prioritization, right? Like, how do I determine what is a priority, right? Like, what am I going to do first? What am I going to do second based on my values, based on the goals that I have that are most important? I think a lot of these things are things that folks recognize, but I think the terminology gets folks, mixed up, right? Task initiation is just like, how do I start a task, right? Like, am I avoiding starting it? Is it easy for me to get started? How do I get started? Motivation is like familiar to folks, but like, how do I persist in a task, right? So I think a lot of these things are things that, I mean, at minimum, we recognize in ourselves, right? Like we're not excused from some of the, same challenges of executive functioning that everyone else, and especially our neurodiverse folks experience. So I think a lot of that, once you start defining what it actually is, people recognize it at minimum in themselves, hopefully. But certainly they can recognize it maybe in their coworkers or their children or their spouse and things like that.
And I can certainly relate to that, because even in my own work supporting students and adolescents with ASD or who are neurodiverse, I see how much this shows up in everyday things like planning, organisation, getting started on tasks, maintain focus, all the things that you've mentioned. But from your perspective, what do you think is actually going on underneath that for people?
Sure. I think that I think the challenge is often that the assumption is that folks aren't trying, right? I see that a lot with like folks saying like they're not trying, right? They're being lazy or they're not working hard. And often I find it's really the opposite. Folks are actually working really, really hard, right? But it's difficult to, approach something that your brain is literally just like absolutely no go, right? So a lot of times, we'll talk about it's less about I'm not don't want to, right? Like most folks want to, for lack of a better, like they want to meet whatever goal it is for themselves and that other people have set, right? Because most of us want to meet whatever that standard is. But I think, a lot of times, especially with folks with ADHD and folks that are neurodivergent, we talk a lot about that dopamine, right? Like they're like, I'm not getting that hit, right? It's not the same for a neurodiverse brain as it is for a neurotypical brain, right? We talk about this for a reason, right?
Mhm. Sure.
So when we think about like, for example, for me, if I clean my room, I get a dopamine hit of like, oh my gosh, I just feel so good about this room being clean. Not every neurodiverse brain feels that way, right? Or feels that way about organizing something or
Mhm.
feels that way about planning something. And when you have the option of getting that dopamine elsewhere, right? Like doing something that feels immediately satisfying, right? Like going out with friends, playing a video game, like whatever it might be, right? Like it always feels like, well, let me get this hit now, right? And I'll deal with this other thing that's like so incredibly draining later, right? I call later like the black hole. It's where things go to never happen, right? Like later
Sure.
is where things go to never occur, right? And it feels sort of what I love about a lot of the neurodiverse folks I work with is like later always seems possible to them, right? It's like the upside of like, it always feels like it's going to happen, right? I
Yeah.
love the positivity of it. And at the same time, it's really where it goes to not happen. So I think that folks don't understand well sort of the neurochemistry of like, it's not just that folks are not trying or that they're lazy, like it's biochemically difficult to do um, in a way that I think is also very hard to understand if you don't experience it as well.
Sure. Something I've really noticed in my own work as well is how much of this it can be invisible, but is often, as you say, is very misunderstood. And there are a lot of hidden struggles people might be experiencing that others don't always see. As you say as well, it can get misinterpreted in things like laziness or lack of effort. But actually there's a
Yeah.
lot of biochemical stuff going on inside that we may not understand. So, Kate, working within in education and training setting myself, I often see how systems can both support but also sometimes miss what individuals actually need. And I suppose from your experience, where do you feel things are still falling short when it comes to supporting neurodivergent individuals?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the concern I have is always that the systems that we have are not meant for neurodivergent brains, right? Like, at least, I can't speak for everywhere. So, but I'll say, like, in the United States, we have not developed a public school system that is meant to serve neurodiverse brains, right? Frankly, we haven't really created a public school system that's really meant for anyone who's not very average, right? We've created a system that's really good for the average student. It's not great for neurodiverse brains. If you're gifted and neurodiverse, like, oh my goodness, right? Like if you're twice exceptional, we've not created a system that's meant for that. And I think a lot of the time, the challenge then becomes that it feels a lot of times for students, I think, and this is what they've reported to me, is it just feels like a failure factory, right? Like I'm in here every day, I'm not meeting the expectations, but this environment wasn't meant for me, right? Like sometimes I'll sit down and talk to a teacher about a student and I'll be like, tell me about like what's going on, right? And a lot of times this could be a college class even, but a lot of times it's a K through 12 because it's a whole day where
Yeah,
everybody's
yeah.
in the same building. And they'll be like, well, they can't sit still, right? They're bouncing off the walls, like they're just constantly moving. And we start, gently talking about like, what are we actually asking this person to do, right? Like we're asking
Mm.
them to sit still in a chair for like 6, 7, 8 hours, right? Like I don't expect myself to do that as a fully grown adult with a fully cooked brain, right? Like we are asking a lot from even children and even adults, right? Who are sitting at their desks, right? For 8 hours a day at work, who like, this is hard for adults. And what we're asking of children who are like, and all children, not even just neurodiverse children, is so, I don't think we've really sat down and thought about that, right? Like, and then we want them to go home and do more work, right? Like what we're asking of them is taxing for all children, but especially for neurodiverse folks for whom these kinds of executive functions are so difficult, but our systems rely so heavily upon them. And so the systems aren't built towards their strengths, right? They're built on a foundation that says you have to have the things that aren't strengths for you in order for this to be a good experience. And I mean, right? So nothing like setting folks up for an upward climb, right? And really expecting them to, we don't set the same expectations for other kids where we're saying, we're going to just really lean in heavily to the things that aren't your strengths because we know that everyone has strengths and weaknesses. I'd love to see a situation where we had learning environments that were more universally designed, right? Like you could show your learning in a variety of ways, right? Like maybe we don't have to take a test or write a paper, or like maybe we could do a video or a demonstration, right? Or maybe I can get this content while I'm walking around and listening, and I don't have to sit in this chair, right, all day for an entire day. And the same really for, our college students and for our workers, right? Like when we expect someone to sit in a cubicle in a giant room where everyone's talking for 8 hours, like that is a lot to ask, right? We're not thinking about like a human nature, right? Like it's very difficult. And so I would love for me to see some areas that were more universally designed that acknowledged the vast differences of the human experience, that people could then choose what worked best for them, regardless of what, the circumstances or the difficulties were, right? And what a great, it's sort of like the curb cuts of the learning world, right? Like, because curb cuts are made, right, for our wheelchair using friends and family. But don't they work so great when you have like a shopping buggy, and you're like, oh, thank gosh, or like a stroller, right? Where you don't have to like try to get it up over the curb, right? Like we all benefit from this idea that we make things more accessible for one group, other groups benefit. So I'd love to see that in a perfect world. If I were queen, Krystal, if I was queen, this is, someday.
Don't mention royalty in America.
Yeah, I know.
But no,
not right now.
Yeah, I do agree. We're big fans of the universal design and learning here as well. It came over from the States to Ireland, and I suppose really my line of work as well, we're really looking at everybody is individual and unique, and not everybody learns the same way. And that's why I love the universal design and learning. As we say, people can learn in a way that's suitable for them, whether it be, recording their voice to give an answer to an exam, or whether it's on video, or whether they can use visual graphics or whatever it may be. But the classrooms, same here in Ireland, they're designed to suit a one-way system. They're not great at catering for all different types of learners, whether neurodiverse or not, or neurotypical people may that be. But everybody, as you say, deserves to learn in a way that's more impactful and meaning for them, to get the information, receive the information in the way that works for them. And sitting for 6 to 8 hours is not great for anyone. And I can certainly tell you, teaching in front of a room for 6 hours with a PowerPoint doesn't work either in a lot of situations as well. So it's really about going back to the drawing board and really looking at how are we accommodating everybody, not just one cohort.
I love that. I love the idea of valuing the wide variety of human experience, right? Like this idea
totally.
that there's no right or wrong way to show up as a human in a space, right? Like versus saying, this is the way we want you to show up as a human. And if you don't show up this way, we're going to other you, right? You're other, you're outside of this. And now we have to figure out what to do with you, right? Like what if we looked at everyone and said, everyone's bringing value to the space, right? And we're just so grateful to have all these different human existences in one space. So someday,
Sure.
Krystal.
If we're all the same, the world will be boring. That's for sure.
Indeed. It takes all kinds.
It does. And Kate, what happens when someone transitions from a structured environment like a school into college or adulthood? where there's a lot
Yeah.
more independence expected.
Yeah. So I will say that sort of this is my impression. So again, throughout, I don't want to speak for everyone, but it's been my impression for a long time that just the way that the United States has pushed its school systems is that things are very assessment oriented, right? And so a lot of teaching and a lot of teachers feel a lot of pressure to teach to those exams because they are heavily judged upon how that is going to proceed, right? And ultimately, sort of as a result of that, a lot of things have occurred. But one of the things that I've noticed a lot of is that a lot of the skill building that would help all students with executive functioning, but obviously, especially our students who this is a specific challenge for them, has really, they've toned that back a lot, right? And because of that, that sort of gap between the executive functioning you could expect to have when you were like in high school in the United States, and then what you need to go to college, which hasn't changed a whole lot, right? Is just getting bigger and bigger, right? And that's really, really scary for a student, right? Who's going from a high school where they don't know, right? What that they don't have the executive functions necessary, like skills necessary, for a college setting. For them, understandably so, they're like, what's wrong, right? Like, I've always done really well, right? Or, I've made it work, right? In some way, shape, or form. And then they get to college, they expect those same things to work, which is understandable, right? It's the only thing they've ever done. And then it doesn't, right? And
Yeah.
now, we're at the end of our first semester and we've failed everything, right? We expect to be able to turn everything in at the end of the semester. And their professor is like, no, right? Like, it was late. I'm not taking it, or there's going to be a huge deduction. No, there's not extra credit for you to like make up, right? All these points that you missed because you didn't know how to study for an exam and then you had to take it anyway, right? Like, no, I'm not going to take that paper late. It's like all of those things. And it is just sort of a huge gap that I think a lot of folks end up falling into, but obviously disproportionately impacts our neurodiverse folks, right? Because ultimately, this is already an area where they're struggling. And for me, at least in the United States, there is already sort of an inequity as it comes to folks graduating from college who have disabilities of any kind, right? You're less likely to graduate, and definitely less likely to graduate on time in the United States from college if you have a disability. Um, and, we've got these folks just falling into this hole where it's not that they are not capable, right, of understanding the content, of doing well in the courses, but they just don't have the independent executive functioning skills, right? Either they haven't been developed, or because they haven't had the opportunity, or maybe they had some exposure, but adults in their life have really been executive functioning for them, right? Whether it's their parents or their teachers or their support people or what have you. Um, and so it's a very steep learning curve. And I've seen folks make that gap, right? And be very successful. But I've also seen a lot of folks fall into that hole and just it's sad. And doesn't need to be that way, right? Um, and I think it's not actually vastly dissimilar to what some folks experience too then when they transition from a high school or a college situation to their first job, right? The executive functioning that requires, depending on the job, is different, right? So they're like, I've not had to keep track of my email to this degree, right? Like, I have to keep a calendar. I can't remember all the things I'm supposed to be doing. And my mom has kept my calendar, right, this whole
Yeah.
time. Or I haven't gone to the dentist in 10 years, not 10, but like 4 or 5 years because I just forget, right? Like, I don't remember to make that appointment, right? And so I do feel like you see that gap sort of continue, whether it's they're going to go to college and the executive functioning is higher, or they're going to go to their first job and the executive functioning is either higher or different, right? What they're going to have to do to make, the job, the workplace work for them.
And even in my own role, I see how small practical shifts can make such a big difference for students, even like little apps to help them to stay on track, to different alarms in their phones and cell phones and this, that and the other. from your own experience, what generally helps people move from feeling overwhelmed or stuck to feeling more capable and in control? And I hear you when you say for a long time is probably parents have been helping them to manage the executive functioning, but how do they take more control back of their executive function for themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I often find, and this is interesting, but it's not even like a skill necessarily, but it's a lot of confidence building that they are capable of doing this, right? Um, I mentioned a lot that a lot of students that I work with ultimately, when we really get down to brass tacks and talk about their experience, they just feel like the adults in their life don't really like them, right? Like their teachers have been disappointed in them. Either they say that they have not lived up to their potential, right? Like if you had these skills, you would have lived up to your potential, or they've had behavior. And so the teacher's like, you're frustrating me, right? Because you're causing some kind of disruption, right, in the space. Or, the parents are disappointed because their room looks like a bomb has gone off and it smells like something died, right? Like, and that's all very understandable. But for them, they're coming to a space of like, there's no evidence here that, and like many adults believe that I am capable, right, of doing, like, I'm just generating, again, like this sort of failure factory, right? And I think the research bears that out, right? It's something, the percentage of like negative feedback that folks that are neurodiverse receive from the adults in their life is statistically much higher, right, than folks that are not. And so a lot of times it really starts with this, like, you are capable of making this happen, of doing this, right? Right? Like this is possible for you, right? Really like developing trust with someone who really often also has a lot of students that I work with, and this is, again, not everyone, but they feel a lot of shame, right? Like, I just want to function like everyone else functions. That would make my life a lot easier. And not really acknowledging or seeing or understanding the strengths that they bring to the table. And again, a lot of that is because of all this negative feedback they received. So really starting with that. And then I think from there, I really start thinking like sort of two things. First is like, what are we going to do first? And it's going to be like, what is the first step? Right? Like not the second or the third or the 10th or the 12th, like one single thing. Right. And for some folks, that's like as small as like, I hate this class. I avoid this homework. And so I'll say to them, like, can you just open the computer and look at it? But you're not committing to doing anything. Like, you're just going to look at it. You're just going to see what it looks like. And then you're going to leave, right? And do something else. And then the next time you're going to do the first question and that's it, right? Like, we can make it as small as you need it to be, right? Like, if cleaning your room makes you feel like you just want to jump out of your skin, like, can you identify, like, I'm just going to put the shoes in the closet. That's it. Or like one pair. Or like, I'm going to look at the first thing that I see and I'm going to put that away and that's it. Right. Like how small can we make this? How doable can we make it? And then no matter how small it is, how can we celebrate that achievement? Right. Because for a lot of folks are like, why would I celebrate putting one pair of shoes away? Like, that seems silly. Right. Or like, why would I celebrate just looking at the document? And it's not silly, right? This is something that's been very, very hard. So how do we do it and then celebrate that achievement? A lot of folks don't like to talk about rewards and things. They're like, we need to develop intrinsic motivation. And that's fine, right? But I am a huge fan of external motivation, and we all get external motivation from some things, right? Like, we go to work and they hand us money for it, right? Hopefully, right? Like we all get that somehow. And it is, and teaching like kids, like, it's okay, or even young adults, it's okay to say, I'm going to do this thing that was really hard and go do something for myself, right? And it doesn't have to be huge. Like, for a lot of my college students, go get a Starbucks coffee, like get the most sugary ice cream looking thing, right? Go watch 30 minutes of your favorite show, like go play video games for 30 minutes, whatever, right? Set a timer, make sure it goes off and you come back. But like, let's celebrate things that are wins without feeling like, well, it wasn't a big enough win. Like, we can just celebrate small things. We don't have to save it for, accomplishing the final goal. Like, we can still celebrate them, but why don't we celebrate along the way, right? And how much momentum and how much motivation and how much dopamine do we get from celebrating, right? Just that we did this one thing. And then how does that roll down the hill, right? And aren't we now more motivated to do the next thing than we were before? Versus feeling like it is a small thing and it's like, oh, well, that wasn't a huge deal. Who cares, right? That's not going to be particularly make me want to come back and do more, right?
Mm.
But yeah, I love to talk with folks about first step, right? And that's not to say that we don't need things like, talking about how to use calendars and setting reminders and thinking about what does prioritization really look like and how do we set a goal and then work backwards. Like, all those skills are really important. But I think ultimately ensuring that students have the space to develop confidence in themselves and learning about, like, how do I just take a first step and just celebrate the fact that I showed up? Like, let's just start there, right? And like see where we can go.
Yeah. And I hear you, because I have students at the moment, some of them, not all of them, they see a big task and they're overwhelmed and they kind of instantly talk themselves out of doing it. But as you say as well, the enjoyment and the reward is in the journey, not in the end goal. And even breaking it down to the first step, the small little steps. Even I had someone recently, the room's a mess at home. It keeps coming up in our one-to-ones and things like, picking up the rubbish, just putting it in the bin, leave everything else. And then the next day, maybe you could pick up the shoes. Another day might be, try and make the bed, just throw the bed sheet over the bed before you leave the room, kind of a thing. So they are very important, and those little things do build up confidence as well. And I find that sometimes when it's in the classroom setting, they find it very hard to do a task, as you say, like, they see the overall document that needs to be done, and it's almost like they try to hide the fact that they don't understand it. Their learning disabilities getting the way. When we do offer to give them help there and then, it's almost embarrassing for them because they don't want to let other people know that they need to rely on other people for help and that they cannot do it themselves. So it's almost like they hide behind a mask, so that other people won't see the fact that they are struggling in situations. And that is really, really hard for them. And as you rightly say as well, it's just breaking it down into small steps, one step at a time. I'm going to take that idea of, look at the first question, just read it. You don't have to do anything with it. Come back later, maybe attempt to answer it and see how you get on. And then maybe do 2 questions the next time and see how it goes. So it's really a journey you're taking them on, because when they see the overall task, it is overwhelming. And for a lot of them, they really struggle because they see their learning disability. For some of them, they might see, the fact that they have ADHD or the neurodiversity might get in the way, that they can't maintain focus for a long period of time. It really gets upsetting for them.
100%. I'd be upset too. Right. Like, I look at a long task and I'm like, really? Or like, I procrastinate just like every other person, right? Like, I'm not exempt, right, from that experience either. And I can completely understand why looking at something that's overwhelming makes you not want to do it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think all of us have had some kind of experience that harkens to that. And I think anytime that happens, luckily, while trying to build their confidence, you're also helping them learn what are the things that work for me and what are the things that don't, right? Because not every strategy that I hand to a student and say, hey, is this one that you would be willing to consider, is one that either one, they're willing to consider, or two, works for them, even if it worked for someone else in a similar circumstance before, right? So I think also this idea of when we think about coaching students, they get all of this choice, right? Like, what am I ultimately going to do? Because that's ultimately what we're saying at the end, right? Is, okay, you've got all these choices. What are you willing to do? And I think we live in a space where, especially our younger people, don't have a lot of choices, right? Like, you're going to be here at this time and do this thing because the adults in your life told you you had to. Right? So anytime we have the ability to give them some space to learn about themselves in a space that they sort of are choosing and navigating, we're building trust, and we're also giving them something they desperately want, right? Especially our older teens that they don't have a lot of, right? And that is control over their own life. Because a lot of folks don't have that.
That's very true. And I think something really important and something I see in students I work with is that there are so many strengths that they have that don't always get recognized. Things like creativity, different ways of thinking, the problem solving. And in our work, probably same with yourself, Kate, that we work from a strengths-based model as well. And what strengths do you see in neurodivergent individuals or any individuals that deserve more recognition?
I love the ones that you just mentioned. I personally, I've seen just folks are so accustomed to having to solve problems in different ways, right? Like, how am I going to approach this in a different way? Because this way that you've laid out doesn't work for me, right? So they're creatively problem solving, something that we ultimately want other people, right, to be good at, but we don't really train well, right? Like schools often do not facilitate an environment where creative problem solving is the goal, right? Through necessity. Again, that's not to create sort of nasty comments towards my teacher colleagues. I too was a teacher and understand what they are going through. But they have a lot to do, and creative problem solving doesn't always make it to the top of the list when there's all these other things that have to be done. Meanwhile, these students are learning that in real time, how they're going to have to navigate to make this work for them. And that is ultimately why, again, that the research bears out that we have so many entrepreneurs who are neurodiverse, like well above neurotypical folks, because they are innovative. They think of how to solve problems in ways that just neurotypical brains do not always think of, right? Or don't think of readily, right? And for all of our like, oh no, you're being impulsive, they're also willing to take calculated risks that some of neurotypical folks are not willing to take, right? Like, and that is, ultimately, these are the folks that are pushing us forward, right? Are thinking of all these different ways that we can solve the world's issues. And they are learning that because they are neurodivergent and this world has not been created for them, right? And they're trying to navigate around that. I have just always been so just impressed and honored by the ways that folks think, right? Because as a coach, I am asking questions and I have some ideas in my mind of things that they could do, right? But my job is not to solve the problem for them ultimately. And so when I say like, what are some options that you have, right? Or what are some resources that you have or that you could use, or what are some things that you could do about this? They will often say an incredibly like creative, interesting, innovative ideas that I have never thought of. And I'm like, that is a good idea. Are you sure you don't want to do this job? Right? Like, because I hadn't thought about that, right? That would be great. Like, let's talk about that. And I so often look at that and say like, that's just not like, I don't have that in me, right? Like, that's not something that I can find in me. And I want a world where the ways that you're thinking about things exist, right? Like, and that they flourish and they come alive, right? And one of the things that I think also, at least in the United States, that we talk about a lot about, especially right now with the way that children at least are being raised, is that like, how gritty are they, right? How resilient are they in the face of failure? Ultimately, we've got an entire group of neurodivergent kids who are coming out of, unfortunately, a failure factory, right? And but who are just coming back to the table over and over and saying, how can I improve, right? How can I get better? How can I get up and try again, right? Like, I want resilient, gritty people who are just like ready to like just continue to come back to a problem and work on how to continue on, right? Like, I am always so impressed on both of those fronts, how incredibly just like courageous folks often are and how creative and innovative at the same time.
If I'm working with neurodivergent people, fascinating, but it's also a huge honor to be in a room with them because they do have some
100%.
amazing creative ideas and how they problem solve situations and the innovation that comes out of them as well. Kate, what shifts when someone starts to understand how their brain works instead of feeling like they need to fix it?
I love it. It starts with, for me, at least the way that I've observed, you kind of see it start in the body language, right? It's like, instead of like, when I start working with someone, it's like a lot of this like sort of closed off body language, right? Like the shoulders are kind of forward. They're like kind of like, it's like the protective stance, right? I'm going to protect my middle, right? So if someone goes to get me, I'm going to be able to protect myself, right? And it's in partially like the way that they carry themselves, right? Like the confidence that they are going to be able to succeed at this and figure this out, right? Like they've got the capacity within them to do that. I think the ways that they speak about it to other people, I don't always have the ability to observe that, but especially with our young folks whose parents I might meet, I don't meet oftentimes the parents of my adult folks that I work with. um, the way that they speak to their parent, right? It's very like, this is they're better self-advocates, right? This is what I need. This is what I want. This is why. If they're like, well, you haven't done XYZ, they're like, that was me before, but I have this track record now of having done this consistently better, right, for this amount of time. And really sort of standing in a space too of like, I've watched students not use accommodations that they've been approved for years and years and years, and really saying, I think I need this in this particular time and place, and I'm going to do that because I need that right now. So I love to watch the confidence grow and then watch it also in sort of come into their engagement with other adults, right? Because it's ultimately watching someone who is, in addition to like sort of growing the confidence of their own identity, is becoming an adult in a space with other adults, right? Versus feeling like, well, this person is a person of authority and I'm just subjected to sort of whatever it is that they want, right? And they know what's best for me, and saying, what is it that I think is best for me? And does that always work out? No. Like I'll say to students, you were a great self-advocate for this. And the answer was still no, right? It wasn't appropriate in this time and place. But that's okay too, because what you're learning now is this was not appropriate here, but they offered you this alternative. Have you thought about trying that, right? Like, and how do we handle when someone does say no, right? And that sort of space and how that's going to work. That has been for me sort of long term. And of course, I love watching folks like actively learn the skills that they need and want, and watch that be successful for them, right? Like they do well on their first exam because they finally were able to determine what study skills are going to work best, right? Like, and that was the goal, right? I love that. But what I love the most, even more, is this sort of confidence that they bring to the space. And hopefully this doesn't happen every time, but hopefully this sort of acceptance of their identity and who they are, and sort of bringing that into them versus feeling like I'm going to push this out because this is shameful, right? And this is not what I want to be. And seeing that they have the ability to navigate the space independently and be good self-advocates. They don't need everyone else to sort of dictate all of that to them.
And just on the self-advocacy bit there as well, Kate, I do love it when I start seeing the students advocate for themselves. It shows a lot of confidence and a lot more maturity and understanding of how they operate for themselves, in their mind. And I know you've worked closely with systems like IEPs and 504 plans. If you can explain those and how important is self-advocacy within those environments?
Yeah. So in the United States, we have 504 and IEP plans, and those are K through 12 plans. Our colleges use different, there's not like a specific name for the sort of process, but they have disability services offices where they approve or deny accommodations, but those are done separately. So our 504 and IEPs are done through K through 12. Our IEPs are for folks who need specialized instruction. So these are folks that are going to receive like very specific, maybe like curriculum changes and or support for their actual curriculum classes. So that's like your math and your English and your social studies and your science and things like that. So they'll have specific goals in there that teachers are working on with them to meet. So they're going to get, this percentage of, this percentage on their quizzes or exams, or they're going to work towards, this level of accuracy with their reading fluency or whatever it might be that they're working on. And it also includes it includes a lot of things, but it also includes the accommodations that they receive, right? So if they get extended time on tests or assignments, or if they receive, chunking of assignments, which is, making those assignments like in pieces, right? Or they have some kind of modification of their exams, or they get a calculator for math or whatever it might be, right? It also exists in that. Whereas a 504 does not include that sort of specialized instruction piece and those goals that I mentioned. It really is focused on, as long as the student has these accommodations, they'll have equal access to the curriculum. So those folks, typically, it's just, quite frankly, like in the most simplified version, list of accommodations, right? It'll say like the student has this disability, and then these are the accommodations that we've approved for them. 504s are definitely becoming more common in the US. They are, in my opinion, less work to implement. Sometimes students do truly just need a 504. Sometimes they might actually need an IEP, but it's easier to implement a 504. So a school might choose to go that route instead. But ultimately, at least in the US, it can be, and parents experience this, which is why they are such strong advocates for their children. Ultimately, at least in the US, the funding that was always, the most simplified way to say this is, the funding that was always promised for these exceptional ed, special education programs in public schools was really never came to fruition. So ultimately, the public school system has to pay for these without actually having received really almost any additional funding for them. And because of that, schools struggle to actually provide the services. Not everyone, obviously, but a lot of systems, public schools do, because they cost money and they don't have very much extra money allotted to them. And so this is kind of where things get sticky, where it's like, well, did they really fully implement the services, or did they give a student all the services that they needed to? And again, I feel for everyone in this and involved in this situation, right? It's a very difficult place to be for a family who wants additional services for their students. It's very hard to be in the situation of a school that doesn't have any more resources to provide. But it is definitely a system that is highly stressed in the US on both the 504 and the IEP side, for sure.
It can be very difficult to navigate when you're looking for grants
It
and
is.
funding.
It is extremely, I can't have more empathy for families and for my colleagues that are teaching and are administrators at the same time. It's also, the US has a teacher shortage everywhere, basically. I mean, I'm sure there's somewhere in the US where there is not, but as a whole, the US has a teacher shortage. But that has almost always been the case in exceptional ed and special ed. So it's also an area where they've always, for the most part, had a shortage of teachers in general to teach that. And again, that impacts, the quality of that instruction and people's ability to receive those services if you don't have enough folks doing the work. And so it's a difficult place to be. Again, if I had all the decision-making power, obviously that's one of the things we would talk about. But it is a tough place to be, and folks, understandably on all sides, it is contentious, and for good reason.
And I'll imagine that's putting a lot of communities into more disadvantage.
It is, especially in the US, public schools are funded by property taxes. So if you live in a more expensive area with more expensive housing, your school's going to have more money, right, than a low-income community will have. But you don't have more or less students, right, that need services. That has not changed. But you will have less money because the community is paying for its public schools. And most communities, that means they're reliant upon the money that is in that specific community, right? So that severely disadvantages our Title I schools, right? Either in our really rural communities or our city communities. They simply don't have the same access to services that a more wealthy public school is going to have. And our private schools certainly have the ability to sort of, navigate around that. But again, that also depends on how competent the private school sort of folks that are working there around disability accommodations. Some are really, really knowledgeable and are really, really supportive, and some really don't know a lot about it, right? Because they are not public, and so they're not held to the same laws that public schools are held. So it really depends on where you end up in terms of whether, again, you could get a really great quality program, or you could get a program that really, they're not trying to not be supportive or helpful, but they don't know, a lot
Yeah.
about it. And so they're not implementing it with fidelity.
That's really hard when you're trying to create inclusive environments and communities for people.
100% it is, right? It's hard to get folks committed, right? There's so many issues, right? And I get that. No, not every person can die on the hill of every issue. And especially right now, right? Ultimately, and again, not to make this a political conversation, but the Department of Ed in the United States is being diminished, right? So there is right now the Office of Civil Rights in the US is not even close to the number of staff that it has had previously. It doesn't have the ability to try as many cases of disability discrimination in schools. And that, we can expect that will impact whether or not folks are meeting the minimum requirements. And so that is not going to it's not making things easier right now. So,
And it's heartbreaking to hear that, because
it is.
I work in a place where we're all about inclusive education and supporting people with disabilities, and pretty much like yourself, we do the good work and hope for the best.
All you can do.
If you could change one thing, I know this is probably a million things about how systems support neurodivergent individuals, what would it be? I know it's hard to pick one, given everything we just said.
Oh man, it is hard. It is hard. I think ultimately for me, and I guess this isn't really a system change, it's more of a mindset change. But so I don't know if this is entirely answering the question, but I'd love to see sort of a societal view of folks that have disabilities, whether it's they're neurodivergent or they have physical disabilities or they're deaf, hard of hearing, they have vision impairment or blindness, like medical conditions, whatever it might be. I would love for folks to presume competence of our folks with disabilities, meaning that I think a lot of times, and this isn't again helped by sort of the political climate and what is being said at this time, is sort of that these are individuals that don't have something to contribute or don't contribute in the same sort of important way that people who are neurotypical or do not have disabilities contribute. And I just think that could not be further from the truth. And as I said, they're bringing, I think, disproportionately some of the most interesting, most creative, most sort of problem solving, grit, resolute, things to the table. And instead, I think societally, we view them as being like, well, they won't contribute as substantially because they don't have as much to offer. And I think, again, that's to our detriment. And I don't want to live in a space where we believe that about anyone, right? And that it also sort of assumes too, and that's not to say that every person can, enter a certain area of the workforce, right? Not everyone's going to be a doctor. That's fine. But once again, also implies one, that these folks are not going to enter that area of the workforce, which I think is inaccurate. And two, also assumes that this is the only way that you can contribute. So even if they don't enter this area of the workforce, that there's no other value that you bring to the table. And I disagree with that as well. I just think the entire premise of it is very upsetting. And inaccurate and detrimental ultimately, right? It sort of goes along with the same belief that a lot of our folks that have mental health disabilities are unsafe or that they're causing more sort of criminal activity, which is also statistically untrue. And so all of these sort of narratives that these any of these folks are sort of not or either causing harm or not contributing or don't have a purpose, I find just just very, very upsetting and very much to their detriment and to all of our detriment. So I'd love to see a situation where we really embraced the like truly what is of value and and frankly like didn't lie to ourselves about what what folks aren't contributing and what does it mean to contribute also. But again, maybe one day they'll call and ask me what I would like to see be different.
Yeah. And as you said, it's a mindset change, but I find mindset change
is.
can change perspective, which can maybe bring action about changing systems, hopefully, for the better. Like
You can only hope.
Yeah, I agree. Everyone has a place in this world and everyone can contribute meaningfully to society in all different shapes and forms. It's about giving people the opportunity and the confidence to do so.
Agreed.
So, Kate, what gives you hope in the work that you do for the future?
It gives me hope that there's so many more. I mean, one of the things about coaching that gives me so much hope is the fact that it's even becoming sort of the profession that it's becoming. And I think part of that is because I feel like that means more and more individuals are recognizing that, this is something that is like when you think about executive functioning or you think about planning for your future, what do I do next? Whatever kind of coaching it is that you are pursuing, that this is something that we can work towards. Like hope is not lost. These are things that we work on just like everything else. And as we pursue sort of whatever future it is we're looking for. And when I think about executive functioning coaching and ADHD coaching and sort of all of those sort of areas that, is sort of big areas of coaching right now, is that again, more and more folks recognizing that like, that's fine. Like we'll just get you this support and we will soldier on, right? Like versus all hope is lost. And it also allows, I think, more and more people to become sort of aware and knowledgeable about what these individuals bring right to the table, and the contributions that they are already making and will continue to make. So for me, it's really the fact that I do think that especially as more individuals are being diagnosed, we have a lot of folks that are being diagnosed late. I think also because there's a lot of children being diagnosed and then, all eyes turn towards the parent and they're like, so, and the parent's like, this sounds kind of familiar what you're saying about my child. But I think just more of that awareness and sort of more of the understanding of, the wide variety that we can experience as human beings and like the diversity that we have that's not just sort of the more stereotypical ones that we think about. I think the awareness of that is what gives me a lot of hope because I think when people become aware, they often are very much on board and they're very supportive and they want to learn more, right? They're interested in what else can be done to be supportive of folks, to include people, right? It's usually when I find that folks are excluding people, they just aren't thinking about them at all, right? Like they're not thinking, I want to exclude this person. They're neglecting them, essentially. They just don't think of them at all. And so when I think about all this knowledge that's coming to the forefront and people learning, that gives me a lot of hope. Thinking about all that we can do if we sort of have more people that are more aware, who are passing information, that are aware of universal design and are aware of like web accessibilities that folks can use screen readers online, like are aware of yes, we don't just have accessibility parking for fun, right? And that, builds a stronger sort of cool, like foundation of, continuing to improve things.
And Kate, for someone listening who might be struggling quietly right now, what would you want them to know?
The first thing I always want folks to know is you are not the only one, which I know is very easy to say and very easy to hear and less easy to believe. But as someone who's worked in universities for as long as I have, I've seen thousands upon thousands of people, and you are not the only one. The chances that you alone are experiencing what you are experiencing are very low. You're an individual, and I want to acknowledge that and all the beautiful sort of nature that you have as a person, but also acknowledge that you are not experiencing what you are experiencing alone. And so I encourage you to go out and see like who else is experiencing these kinds of things. Coaching is really, really helpful. I know I've said that sort of throughout here. I'm executive functioning coach, but there are other coaches. Just because you are neurodiverse does not mean executive functioning coaching is your only choice. You might really gravitate towards a life coach who focuses on confidence or relationship building or something of that nature. But I like to leave folks with this idea, like you are not alone. There is an entire community of people who have at least a somewhat understanding of what room you're standing in, right? Like we might not know the exact spot you're standing in the room, but we're in the same room as you, right? And we see you and we understand that, you know, what struggles, you know, you're saying to us, right, as we're listening. And not just that, like we want to listen to you, right? That's literally what coaching is, right? Like
Hmm. Kate, I can talk for hours on this topic, and I can certainly feel your passion and your real genuine interest of wanting to help others to thrive and to get on in life. And thank you so much for sharing your insight, your experience, and the work you do. And please keep doing it for a long time to come. It's been such a meaningful and important conversation. And if you're in America and you're listening to Kate here, and if you would like to reach out to Kate, I will include Kate's details in the show notes as well, so you can reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to join me this Sunday for a Sunday Reset Ritual, your weekly space to pause, reset, and come back to yourself. And as always, thank you for being here. I'll see you soon for another episode of the Empowered Self podcast. Thanks again, Kate, for such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Krystal. It was an honor and a privilege.